Hey everybody, uh, Duncan Macdonald here, and if someone could, if you don't mind, if someone could raise their hand or something to let me know that you can actually see and hear me, that would be great. I am definitely sick of doing any kind of webinars where no one can hear me. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got a bunch of stuff to cover today, and I'm going to try to do it in a pretty quick and succinct manner. This is part two of the webinar series that I'm doing around immunity in this sort of challenging time in which we're all kind of scared about our immune systems and what's happening with potential pathogens and viruses, like COVID-19 and stuff that are happening right now. So if you didn't see part one, which was on sort of our mucosal barrier of the body and our immune function, go ahead and watch that one later. They're not like, it's not like a plot line that you need to follow. You don't have to do them all in exact order, but just understand that there is a whole other webinar in which I explain some of these principles in terms of our immune function. And also, I am in shelter in place, just like most of all of you are on this webinar. I don't know, we may have some international people on here, so maybe, who knows, right? Who knows what's going on everywhere. So if you are like, wow, Duncan, did you use some kind of green screen for this webinar to make it really homey by having it look like, you're in some kind of bedroom or something? No, this is my guest room in my house. So no industrial lights and magic, no fancy stuff today. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So what we're talking about today, though, is the general microbiome and how it actually influences our immune system. And when we're talking about the microbiome, keep in mind, like we talked about last time, we're actually talking about not just the microbiome in the gut, but the microbiome distributed through all of the mucosal barriers of the body. So we're talking about the upper respiratory tract, in the lungs. We're talking about the digestive tract all the way through. We're talking about the vaginal tract, the urinary tract. All of these have mucosal barriers where we can potentially, it's, like where we're contacting the outside world, right? And so that is where we have our primary defense against any kind of pathogen, which is that mucosal barrier. And we hear a lot about the microbiome right now because everybody sort of is generating a lot of scientific interest because we're seeing that there are a lot of therapeutic interventions that we can do utilizing the power of the microbiome. And one of those is around immunity. We're finding out more and more that the microbiome seems to regulate problems like autoimmunity or inflammatory problems throughout the body that are mediated through immunity. So we want to think about, well, how can we calm everything down within that environment, and how can we be as supportive as possible to the type of bacteria and organisms that are going to help our immunity, right? So, and this is actually super interesting to me because I've been practicing Chinese medicine for 21 years now, and that is medicine that, its principles go back thousands of years. And one of the primary principles in all natural medicine fields, whether it's, Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, naturopathy, is this concept that the gut is kind of the center of our health. And, the Chinese had thousands of years ago, they understood that this majority of our immune function was in our gut. They just talked about it in a little bit different language. But it's very interesting to see the science now catching up with a lot of this. So first of all, symptoms that you have a disrupted kind of, biome situation are going to be gastrointestinal symptoms a lot of the time, a lot of bloating, gas, perhaps feeling uncomfortable after eating. I would say things like SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And, these are all biome issues and all things that should be looked at being corrected. When our biome is not functioning properly, we get a lot of fatigue because we're not pulling our energy out of our food the way that we should. Our body gets inflamed through this immune regulated process. This can lead to autoimmunity, where proteins are moving across that mucosal barrier, and then they're causing biomimicry, where our body actually recognizes an invader and kind of freaks out and goes after its own tissue because it kind of looks like that protein that's leaked across. And this is one of the primary theories in autoimmunity now. In fact, we know it's not even really a theory. We know of certain infections that are directly correlated with autoimmunity. And if you have an autoimmune condition, that needs to be investigated. One of the things that I'll say right from the get-go with this biome stuff is that the science on this is exploding. Like, we are getting more and more information like every day, but it takes 10 to 15 years for scientific information to sort of bleed its way into conventional medicine practice. So, 15 years from now, we're going to be talking about this biome stuff with your general practitioner when you go to a visit at Kaiser. Unfortunately, none of that information is going to make it into the textbooks for general medicine for a long time. And this is why your doctor may not know a lot about this information unless they're like just super interested in it like me and they look at it all the time. Hormonal imbalances go right along with biome imbalances. And I don't know that I'll have time to talk about exactly how those axes work, and then there's a big connection between the biome and the sort of nervous system as a whole. That balance between fight or flight nervous system and kind of calm and relaxed nervous system. We're learning more and more about this gut brain axis and how it influences one another, but it's very direct. And so I can't tell you how many times I have cleared gut pathogens from people and suddenly seen their anxiety disappear, for instance. Like, it's really amazing. Every single infection the body is dealing with within that gut biome is a burden on the stress hormones of the body. And the stress hormones, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, also come back to help the biome, right? So we want to make sure we don't have infections that are causing problems. So how do we figure this stuff out, right? Like, let's say you came to me and were like, I have problems and I want to figure out what's going on. Well, there's testing, right? And there's a couple of different types of testing. There's what's called PCR testing, which is this one in the center here. That's what we're actually doing for COVID right now. When they take one of those cotton swabs and like jam it up into your back sinus almost to your brain and stuff, what they're looking for is a sample that contains little genetic particles of the COVID virus, and then they magnify that using this PCR technology to look for the presence of the virus. Okay, so PCR is almost like crime scene technology. You're looking for genetic particles, and then you're magnifying it out to look for the bad guy. Okay, and this is used to be way too expensive, and now this is standard practice within functional medicine. Some of the, like Kaiser and some of the more old school places, are still using OMP testing. This is where someone is actually looking under a microscope at a stool sample looking for the bugs. And there can be a lot of false negatives with that technology. It kind of depends on how well rested the technician is and what came up in that sample. So we use different testing for different purposes. This PCR analysis also allows us to look at, like, we know of, hundreds and thousands actually of commensal, like, good bacteria that are in the gut and potentially dysbiotic bacteria. We're learning more all the time, but there are certain ones that we know exist in a certain ratio within almost every healthy biome if you look across people as a population. And these are what we consider our bellwether bacteria. They're like the ones that we need to see in the right amount to know that things are functioning properly. Okay, and we're going to talk about one of those bellwethers here in a minute. So let's just stop and think about how crazy this is for a second, because this whole biome picture is just unreal. So this is just a basic slide to think about what your biome is doing. And remember that, our biome is massive in terms of our gut. It's about 60% of our immunity. One of the reasons it's so much of our actual immunity is because the surface area is so massive. I mean, your small intestine, if they unraveled all the little fingerlet alveoli and everything that are in the gut and they were to lay it all across, it's like as big as a tennis court or something. So you can understand how much like immune based cells are required to patrol that amount of surface area, right? So the microbiome, it protects us directly against pathogens. So, if that real estate is taken up by the healthy bacteria of the gut, then it's very hard for unhealthy ones to come in and set up shop. It actually directly synthesizes some of the absolute essential vitamins for us, like vitamin K and B12. This is all certain species of bacteria taking raw ingredients that we do not digest and digesting them and forming these vitamins for us that are critical. Uh, Immune system development. So we're going to talk about this in a minute, but it's how the microbiome actually signals your own immune cells. We live in this homeostatic relationship with these organisms. We like to think of ourselves as us and all the microbes as them, but as we're going to see here in a minute, we're actually we're actually like one and the same, and we work almost like a colony together, like a community, rather than it just being our brain thinking about what we're doing. It's really crazy. Promotion of intestinal angiogenesis. This is sort of blood vessel production. Promotion of fat storage. Our biome says a lot about our metabolism, about whether we are going to put on weight or use weight as energy. Short chain fatty acid production. This is like vitally important for gene signaling, energy production, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, because one of those short chain fatty acids, something called butyrate, is critically important for our health. And it is something that can be supplemented in the short term if someone's biome is really disrupted. And then finally, modulation of the central nervous system. And this is that gut-brain axis that I was talking about. The way that a disrupted biome can actually manifest as nervous system irritation, like sleep disorders or irritability, brain fog, anxiety, lots, all of these things can tie back to that fight or flight response. Okay, I gotta keep chugging here, you guys. All right, so this is a look at our sort of intestinal wall and mucosal barrier, okay? And we're just gonna look at this for a second because this is just mind-bogglingly cool, okay? So right here, we have our cell wall here, our immune barrier, right? This is our intestinal wall here. And here is all the stuff floating around in the biome as kind of stool and stuff passes through. Here we have our mucosal barrier. And then inside of us, we have all of these really awesome immune cells here. And, these are inflammatory and immune cells with fancy names like Th17 and ILC3 and stuff like that. But the important thing to realize here is out here, these healthy sort of bacteria like B. fragilis, for instance, which are supposed to be there, they are in direct communication with our immune cells across this barrier, regulating what the immune cells do. It's almost like our body responds to the signaling from the healthy bacteria in terms of how they should distinguish self from other, what action they should be taking. And so if this biome is disrupted and B. fragilis is not here, it's impossible for them to have this kind of communication with our immune cells. And this is how autoimmunity develops. This is how progressive allergies develop in adults and stuff. So you can think of like the presence of the proper bacteria in our gut. It's actually tuning and signaling our immune system on a constant basis. You can see here that secretory IgA, like we talked about, is getting signaled by the proper cells here, activating T cells. So, and we're going to look at one of these bacteria in particular called Akkermansia muciniphila in a second, because it is a really incredible bacteria that comes along and kind of like maintains this like mucin, like mucus, right? And this particular Akkermansia uses this mucus as its fuel supply. And it's almost like a gardener comes in here and cleans this up and maintains this mucosal barrier. And it is found in proper ratio in the guts of universally healthy biomes across the planet, hunter-gatherer societies. Everyone who is healthy has proper Akkermansia. And we're going to talk about how you can restore the levels of yours in a minute. Okay, so actually here's Akkermansia muciniphila right here, okay? And I was going to go over just a couple of the scientific studies. These are ones just like, I must have 20 of them. I just pulled a couple of them and stuck them in here. If you guys are interested, it is so interesting. Just like Google, Akkermansia or, an immune response or something like that, you'll come up with more than you've ever dreamed possible. And what we're seeing here is Akkermansia induces intestinal adaptive immune response during homeostasis. So that's complicated science talk for basically if Akkermansia is present, it helps the immune system adapt to what is going on in its environment, right? Akkermansia is associated with protection from obesity, enhanced wound healing, and anti-tumor response. You'll notice that in a lot of this scientific literature that we look at, they're often talking about tumor response because a lot of it is funded or looking directly at cancer prevention and stuff. But whenever we see like a tumor response, we can think of that as being a basic immune response. It's the immune system that cleans up precancerous cells or attacks cancerous cells once they are identified within our body. And I'm going to blow through these because you guys can look them up. The microbiome, regulation of T cells during inflammation and autoimmunity. So the intestinal microbiota plays a crucial role in influencing the development of host immunity, and that host immunity regulates the microbiota through that intestinal barrier that we were just looking at. And it works on intestinal barrier maintenance and immune exclusion. Immune exclusion, right? Keeping the bad guys at bay, keeping them out of our way, okay? Okay, here's where obviously my staff has put in my commercial, which is that I am Duncan at Origins Medicine, and we are accepting new patients. We're also accepting all of our patients. Like you guys, this last week has been a real eye-opener. I've done a bunch of consults with patients, and I am a little bit worried about people right now. I think a lot of people, this is such a disruption, the shelter in place, and a lot of people have hunkered down and are eating poorly, are stressing really hard, are drinking too much alcohol. They're engaging in all this behavior. They're not exercising. They're not getting sun exposure. So if you are one of our previous patients who is watching this, like we have set up telemedicine appointments now at Origins Medicine. You can easily go there and book one. You'll see a new functional medicine patient button that you can press, and you can talk to our awesome health coach, Jennifer, who seriously, I cannot recommend Jennifer enough. And she will do a free 15-minute consult with you and figure out if you are sort of an appropriate case for functional medicine for us to work with. One of the things I really want you guys to understand is that setting up routine during this crazy dysregulated time is so critical. And the role of having a coach or a healthcare practitioner like us at Origins Medicine or like Jennifer is that they can keep you on track so that the framework by which we lead a healthy life is not falling apart. That is the end of our commercial announcement, and now it's back to our regularly scheduled program. Okay, so first we have, before we get into any more about biome stuff and how we're going to correct it, we have to think about the elephant in the room. okay? And I guess that's a little bit of an odd analogy because we're talking about your gut, and we certainly wouldn't want an elephant in your gut, but these can sometimes seem as impactful. And what I'm talking about here are pathogen infections, okay? This is not the normal bacteria flora that we're going to try to nourish and bring back to health. These are infections that, if they are present, you basically cannot have a healthy biome response. Okay, this is the stuff where these are like the villains of our story. If the villains are there and we do not eject them, if we do not take care of them, they are constantly inflaming and poking holes in the intestinal barrier. And so therefore, they can torpedo all your efforts to try to create a healthy biome and immune response. So it's something that we really need to think about and pay attention to. And so we do this with PCR technology. So all of the testing, you guys, I'm talking about, like the gut testing or the cortisol, adrenal testing and stuff, all of this is done from your home. The lab company sends you a kit and you will do a saliva sample or a urine sample or a stool sample. It wraps right back up with a freeze pack and it just ships off to the lab. Then the results are sent to me and then we do a consult and talk about them. So none of this is stuff that you even have to leave the house for. Functional medicine is almost like designed like in a way to be perfect for this unfortunate situation. So this is a stool sample when we're checking the biome or we're looking for pathogens, okay? And this is called a GI map test. So it's looking for bacterial pathogens, stuff like C. diff or E. histolytica or salmonella, some of these things. Then there are direct pathogens like Giardia and Cryptosporidium. Then there are viral pathogens they're looking for. They're not looking, the GI map does not have COVID-19 on it yet, but it's the same technology that they're using for COVID-19. They're just doing it from the nasal rather than looking at a stool sample, right? Because COVID seems to be affecting our upper and lower respiratory tract. Remember from the last webinar, right? The mucosal barrier of the body is one barrier. It is one system that is, it's a cohesive system. So the majority of that system is in our gut because of the amount of real estate involved. There's a lot of it there. But if you damage or infect or impair the mucosal barrier at any place, it affects all the other mucosal barrier tissue of the body, right? So this is why people who have impaired immune function in the gut seem to have more seasonal allergies or sensitivities to food, or oftentimes we will see gut infections that then seem to cause chronic urinary tract infections in women. This mucosal barrier is like one system through our upper respiratory, our GI, our urinary tract, vaginal tract, our lungs. It's all one connected system. So if there is a bad guy at play here in the gut, we need to eject them before we are going to be able to establish a proper immune response in the gut, a proper biome-based immune response. So, we go bug hunting, right? And this test shows us a little bit about normal bacteria, like bifidobacteria here, right? That's one that you guys are probably familiar with. Lactobacillus, that's one that you're familiar with. So this is looking at a small number of the normal flora that we would expect. And then we get to dysbiotic stuff. Like this particular patient's got a botulism infection that's about 6 times what should be there. It's got some enterococcus, some citrobacter here, pretty decent infection there. Like these are all, and that's a potential autoimmune trigger right there because of its effect on that mucosal barrier, allowing proteins to leak across the gut, right? So if these infections are not dealt with by cleaning up the gut in a proper way, then, I'm not going to say you would get no help from probiotic type of therapies and stuff, but it's going to be limited in terms of what you can do to create the environment for proper immunity. So we got to, what it comes down to, you guys, if you're having digestive problems or you have a history of digestive problems, if you have any kind of chronic immune-based problems like allergies or eczema or, you know, you name it, or you have some of these syndromes like, you know, irritable bowel syndrome or some of these things, this PCR based testing really, really needs to be done on you to identify if there are problematic infections, and they need to be dealt with. Otherwise, there really is not a great path out of this situation, and there isn't a great path to having proper immunity. So it's something that we really do need to look at. So if you fall into that category, you know, let's run a GI map on you or a GI effects, which we're going to look at in a minute. So, and here we see, you know, under protozoic infections, we have some infection here. And then we get to look at some of the intestinal health, right? And so particularly important is right here, the secretory IgA under immune response. You guys remember from the last lecture that I did, secretory IgA is what causes mucosal integrity at the immune barrier. It is our frontline immune defense. And what controls secretory IgA? Cortisol and the adrenal response. It basically is dictating the health of that immune barrier. So chronic stress runs it down. Look at this. In this person, secretory IgA is supposed to be between 500 and 2,000. It's all the way down at a 104. That just means that the barn door is open, you guys. Whoever wants to wander in and set up shop, and go for it. There's no lock on the door, right? And how do we raise secretory IgA and fix that barrier? Is by normalizing the stress hormone response and normalizing cortisol. We do that by doing an adrenal test, which is done through 4 saliva samples, and that allows us to create a program to deal with that. And right now, you guys, we're all so stressed out that this has taken a big hit on the immune barrier of our. This is why when people are chronically stressed, why they often get colds. That is that secretory IgA and immune barrier relationship at play. So the other test that we use very often is by a company called Genova, and it's called a GI effects. Now, this is a test that looks much more at the biome as a whole, right? So here, this is an example of what you would see on the first page of the test, and it's showing us, you know, that there is some infection present, that secretory IgA is acutely raised, meaning that that infection has triggered a strong immune response. It hasn't collapsed yet, like we saw in the last patient's test. That there are some insufficiencies involved, like pancreatic enzymes or things that are needed to help break down and digest our food, and that there is an imbalance, basically, of the commensal bacteria and some of the pathogenic bacteria. You know, one of the things that we see a lot, you guys, is more often than not, what we're seeing right now is bacterial overgrowth in people. This is something that Chinese medicine has always had within its differential diagnosis, but it's only as we've been learning more and more about the biome that we realize that you can have too much bacteria as a whole, or it can migrate to places it shouldn't be. That's like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or something, right? And so, you know, also you can have overgrowth of stuff like lactobacillus or something. So we all go taking all these probiotics like lactobacillus probiotics or something. And sometimes we could be making things worse, which is why, like, I'm going to give 2 paths of recommendation at the end of this. One path is self-guided for those of us who don't have any pre-existing health issues. We're just looking to better our biome and kind of create a little bit of a better immune response. And the other is for people who have issues, like what we need to do in order to search out those issues. And here we see on the GI effects, we get to take a look at fecal secretory IgA. Same thing, SIG-A, that mucosal immune barrier. Here it's being irritated because something is attacking the body and it's mounting an immune response. And then we get into the short chain fatty acids. So one of the really cool things about the biome is that it takes a bunch of the stuff that we can't digest, all these like fibers that we cannot digest, and it actually uses them for fuel and breaks them all down. And this is why prebiotics will have a lot of non-digestible fibers in them, resistant starches in them. And the biome breaks them all down and it creates this stuff called butyrate, which is profoundly anti-inflammatory, profoundly like regulating to the gut. And butyrate is one of those pathways that we looked at where the biome is communicating with the immune cells is via this butyrate pathway. Butyrate can be profoundly as a supplement, it has typically been hard to get butyrate to be absorbed, but there is a new form of butyrate that came around in 2019 that actually in a liquid form that is highly absorbable, and it can be in the short term a very important supplement for some of our GI cases. Okay, so we don't have too much time here left, so I'm going to kind of get through this and get to my recommendations, but all this is showing. The whole point of this slide is to remember that the stress response, our stress hormones, are like the apex of our entire health. They're like the capstone that holds everything else together. If you don't normalize the stress hormones at the top, it's very hard to hold anything else together in a way that will be lasting and impactful, right? And so within functional medicine, the two things that we always want to test with every single patient is we want to test our body system 1, which is the stress hormones, and we want to test body system 2, which is the pathogens, because the way this all plays out is some kind of stressful event happens, and this is a way oversimplification, but you'll see what I mean. And I would say that global pandemic would certainly fit in here. That disrupts system 1, that causes cortisol in that HPA axis to become dysregulated. So the brain is no longer having a proper stress response. And that directly through that secretory IgA knocks back that mucosal barrier. Suddenly the barn door is open and some of these infections set up shop, and then all bets are off on establishing proper immunity from the biome. Okay, so treatment. What can we do about this? We've got some really cool tests, right? We can find out a bunch of super interesting stuff, but what can we do? Okay, so self-guided. If you are just someone at home who's like, what can I do during this time to try to just help my biome? Okay, chew your food. That's like the #1 thing, because it's those fibers that break down through the chewing process and the polyphenols that are released, or if you're sipping green tea or something along with your meal, those polyphenols and that fiber is what feeds the biome. That is the prebiotic, right? We have prebiotics and probiotics. Prebiotic means you're giving stuff to your biome that you actually cannot digest. It is not for you, it is for the gut biome. And then the gut biome takes that and turns it into all these helpful things like vitamin K or butyrate or all these anti-inflammatory compounds. And then relax after you eat. Most of us have a little bit of time right now. After you eat, just relax and kind of breathe and focus on how thankful you are for having food and the shelter and that you have during this time. And just be thankful and calm that immune response down, calm that fight or flight response down so it's not impairing the gut. Eat prebiotics and resistant starch. So that can be stuff like legumes, bananas, asparagus, onions, chicory. If you Google sort of like prebiotic foods, you'll find a really long list. And some of those prebiotics are what we call resistant starch. And that is a starch, just like it sounds like, that is resistant to us digesting it, but our biome can. Bob's Red Mill potato starch, just a 1/4 teaspoon, starting at a 1/4 teaspoon and working up to about a teaspoon a day, is a really great way to feed that biome. Okay, and it's super cheap. It's at the drugstore in the baking section. It's just potato starch. You mix it with a little water, drink it down. It's a great one because right now it's a little hard for us to perhaps get all of the vegetables and stuff that we would want to supplement at our prebiotic situation. So you can actually use supplements for prebiotics. They make prebiotic like fiber powders, and the advantage to those is that they tend to have a wide diversity of fiber types. So the more diverse the fiber type, the more diverse the bacterial commensal bacterial situation in the gut. And this is, they're finding that the more diverse the species in the gut, the healthier the person typically is. And because we're eating processed food and we're limiting the amount of fiber and stuff, we tend to have pretty non-diverse biomes. So it's, the supplement is an absolutely perfect way to go in this situation. I would prefer you got it from food, but given the situation we're in, and there's going to be some recommendations of specific products that I like that will be emailed to everybody. Okay, if you're watching this on replay, you can ping us at office at Kalish Wellness, and we'll make sure that we get that to you. Use probiotic foods like kimchi or sauerkraut or yogurt, or all these other like probiotic foods to tune the gut, right? Those probiotics are moving through and tuning the gut. I got a question last time I gave a lecture like this. Well, what's up with probiotics? Like, do they even make it to your gut? Like, doesn't that just get killed by stomach acid? And the answer to that is yeah. Like, some of it gets through, because when we do these biome tests, we can see, like, if you take a bunch of lactobacillus probiotic supplements, we will see lactobacillus start to rise. So some of it is getting through. However, what we only started to understand early last year was that probiotics may work in a way that we had no idea about before, that they actually, rather than it being like an organism that is setting up shop, it's sort of moving through the body, tuning the immune system as it passes through, which is really crazy. Like, we're discovering that probiotics may work in a completely different way that we understood before mechanistically. I'm not going to get super into that right now because we don't have time. So yeah, you can supplement with prebiotics and then work on your stress. Remember, it's that adrenal function through cortisol that manages secretory IgA that dictates the health of that immune barrier of the gut. And that's what allows these bad guys to come set up shop that will then make it impossible to have a proper biome response. If your health is compromised, like, if you are suffering from chronic inflammatory responses, any kind of chronic health issue, it doesn't even have to be GI. Like, we have the time to work on our health right now, you guys. Like, let's get some lab tests shipped out to you. Let's find out what is going on and find out if there are some of these villains in the situation. And at the same time, let's test and correct the stress hormones. It'll make you feel more resilient during this stressful time, but it's how our body manages inflammation. Cortisol is like cortisone that would shoot into your elbow. It's if you had tennis elbow or something, it is the body's way of managing inflammation. And if cortisol has been taxed and disrupted, like I said, it's like the what do they call those? The keystone or whatever at the top of a structure. It's what holds everything else together. And if we don't have a proper stress response, it's very difficult to correct and hold correction to the health or the biome or whatever. We need to get rid of those pathogenic organisms that we identify, and there are sometimes we have to use sometimes we have to use antibiotics, but the majority of the time we can use kind of a botanical-based program. And the advantage to this is they're much more gentle on the biome as a whole. They don't like nuke the biome, and you can go through multiple life cycles of the pathogen, because pathogens will become cystic in the inflamed gut. And as the gut starts to heal and get uninflamed, it ejects those cystic forms and they can re-inoculate. So you typically want to go through multiple life cycles with something that is gentle and not destroying the gut at the same time. And then after that, we want to rebuild the biome using prebiotics, probiotics, and stuff like we talked about last time in the last lecture that can actually directly help to build that mucosal barrier again, like glutamine and stuff like that. So once again, you guys, thank all of you. It really actually means a lot to me just to see so many faces on here. But everybody just stay healthy and safe. Realize that we have a ton we can do proactively for our health right now with the time that we have. I am here for you guys. We here at Origins Medicine, we'll be back in the clinic when this thing lifts. We're not going anywhere, but we're also here right now to help you guys with functional medicine or Chinese medicine teleconferences. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for now. So once again, you guys, thank you so much for attending this webinar, and I'll talk to you guys again soon, okay? All right, thanks. Everyone stay safe.